now that we have a good number of attendees, I'm going to go ahead and quickly talk about the format of the of the webinar, what I'm intending to show you, and also about opening it up. So what I'm going to do is run through some what I believe are kind of if you're using CAD and you're considering using Revit, BIM, and that's, I've seen it to this day where it's still a decision a lot of smaller firms need to make. I think the larger firms have all kind of moved to Revit, if not entirely in a large degree. But on a smaller firm and smaller practitioners, it can it can be a decision you might want to make but need more information. So what I'm trying to frame it is kind of basic overview. I was telling Madison, who's running the meeting, it's like Revit 101, real basic stuff that maybe people don't cover anymore, but is very important for those who are considering it. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and move to my next slide. Okay, so here are the objectives of the webinar today. I want to first go over, like, if you are looking at purchasing Revit, there's 2 or 3 options that you may want to consider. So I do want to cover those and kind of do a comparison of them. I know when some people are considering, LT versus regular Revit, that yes, there's some things that are included that are not included in LT. The Revit, I want to kind of go over that so that it's at least clear, not a mystery of what the difference is. Then the next thing I want to cover is places where you can learn Revit, just methods that you can learn Revit, and kind of what's typical for these days. Then, once I cover those, I'm going to go into what I consider Revit a hybrid system, which is, you can see here, drafting, modeling, and datum. So it's people always consider it a modeling program or a 3D program, but in my view, it's definitely a hybrid system because there's a lot of modeling that we still do, and a lot of drafting that we do. So, when people think of it as a modeling system, I think that's inappropriate because it's really a hybrid system. And then the last part I'll go over is the interface, kind of for people less familiar with Revit, kind of describing it, and in some cases how it compares to CAD. And how I'm going to do this is I'm going to run through all the slides, or all the different sections, and I'm going to present the information that I have. If you have questions on it, go ahead and enter it. We do have the chat open. Just Madison's paying attention to the chat, and I do have it up and running. If I can answer some in line while it's going, I will. Otherwise, we'll have a discussion at the end. And then the other thing I was hoping to do is after I cover my material and we open it up, ask questions that I also get comments, suggestions, tips, experiences from others in the audience that based on sort of what we're covering, might be valuable to share with everyone. Okay, so I think that's how we'll do it. So the first part I want to cover, calling it Revit options, is if you are considering Revit, there's a few ways to get it. Okay, so, and I think most of you know about these, but I'm gonna kind of talk, rather than just say, oh, there's Revit LT and there's full Revit, talk about some different, what are the features in the different ones and pricing structures, just to give people a better idea of why they should choose one, or may want to choose one versus another, and what that entails. So I think the first thing that would come up is cost. It's very, and a lot of this information I pulled both here and I compared to AutoCAD, pulled from the Autodesk website. So these are the prices that they're going by. Whether you have a reseller that can get you a better price, but a lot of times if you are going for Revit LT, I doubt you would go through a reseller. You may, but you can purchase it directly from Autodesk. So you can see here, if you look at the annual subscription price, and I have 3 of these up, is Revit LT is just about $500 a year, which is very decent price. Not, you know, I don't think it's outrageous for anyone. But when you compare it to the full version of Revit, which is 2675 a year, that's a big difference. So if you were to make a decision between, you know, going with the Revit LT and regular Revit, there would have to be some, I'm assuming there would have to be some very good reasons for you to do so. And then with that, you know, to kind of help the comparison, this little in the red box, this is what they are charging for a subscription to AutoCAD, the latest version of AutoCAD. So you can see, compared to, say, subscribing to Revit LT, you know, it's much more expensive than the Revit LT, but less expensive than Revit. And the reason, you know, so if you're going to compare, you know, you kind of want to pull those prices in, but then also just to, you know, kind of, you know, take a look at that, is that they also sell the AEC, the Architecture, Engineering, Construction Collection, which basically include, I'm not even going to go into all the products it has, but it has Revit, AutoCAD, Civil 3D, lots of other AEC programs. It's almost, so what they're almost doing is, you know, for $600 more than this subscription, you get everything, right, from the Revit subscription, or, you know, say from the AutoCAD subscription. So when if you're going with this last option, it's usually, you know, you're paying a little bit more, but you're getting everything pretty much that you could want from Autodesk in that package. So in this respect, you know, if you don't have the money and you want to spend 500, if you are spending the money on AutoCAD, it's just maybe a little bit more to, you know, to go with Revit, and then a little bit more to get all the products together. So, you know, for here, again, like I said, is, you know, if you bought that, added 600, you have AutoCAD, you have Revit, you have the full version of everything. All right. So now, just to kind of get a better idea of what, when people talk about, you know, what is included or not, I'm going to go through some of these charts really quick, again, that I pulled off their site, and then can, you know, when we get into the question and answer period, maybe even demonstrate or clarify questions on it. But you can see in architectural modeling, pretty much everything is included, and the one thing that is not, it says, is massing studies. So there is a feature in the full version of Revit, and I don't know if this would be a small practitioner desire, but it's massing studies, and you can actually mass out, like, build shapes, you know, typically of, you know, like towers or complexes, or, you know, unusually shaped buildings, and then you can clad them. You can apply a curtain system, you can apply detailed architectural information onto it. So you don't get that feature with Revit Lite, but it wouldn't seem like a deal breaker to me, because I don't know if that would come up in smaller practices. Now here is, it's just advanced modeling, they call it, and and you can see here's what you get and everything, and then you get the ability to make groups, which is, you know, grouping things together and repeating them. And it's family editor, and Revit family is, you know, like blocks, right? It's how you make like a door or a window or a chair, right? So you get the ability to do those. Now, here's the ones that it doesn't have, and I can tell you, when I look at some of these, like sending it to Format Pro, global parameters, etc. I don't know if those are that interesting. This conceptual massing and adaptive component, that relates back to what I mentioned in the previous slide of this massing, you know, shapes and elements and applying architectural articulation to them, which is what these two do. So again, that you don't have that feature. But the one feature I know, because I know when I have, you know, I've worked in Revit for 25 years, and I'm used to all the features as they've developed. And then when I look at using Revit LT, because I do have some clients, some colleagues that use Revit LT, one of the things that I do miss is that it's called in-place modeling. And just for those of you who aren't familiar with Revit, and I can demonstrate this when I open up Revit later, but this is the ability to, when you're adding walls and windows and a lot of these other sort of model type elements, they're called system elements. and they exist for, like, you put a wall and then put a window in it and put a door in it and all this kind of standard, and it uses these families like I'd mentioned here. In-place modeling is where you can just start building any shape. Basically, if you think of it as taking like SketchUp or Rhino and using that kind of building technique within Revit. So you have all the system elements, you have all that, and then here you can build a custom canopy or a custom reception desk or something without having to make a family. So this is something that isn't a deal breaker maybe, but it is something that I would miss. And then and then here's some of the, now I'm getting in. So you can see in those features, there aren't really a lot of deal breakers in going from Revit LT to Revit. But when you get into things like this topic, collaboration, there is really no collaboration in Revit LT. You can work in I call it a single user file, right? Sort of opening up, say, like a CAD file. It's like having a Revit project. You can work in it, you can save it, someone else can work at it, they can save it, but you cannot work at the same time, right? You can't have multiple users. And this again, this might not affect a small practitioner, small firm, because one person might be working on this project, or you might not be working on something at the same time and passing things around. That would work. But if you are getting anywhere close to needing 2 or more people working at the same time on a project, this collaboration feature is one of the best things of Revit, that you have one file that stores all the model information, and then people can work from different copies of that file, extracting and putting information into it. So that's one of the big things that you miss. Some of these other things I don't think are really much to talk about, but this work sharing, being able to work with multiple people, that was a big Revit feature from early on that other programs didn't have, and it is still one that most people especially in larger firms, use today. So that's something to consider. If you're working amongst yourselves in a smaller office on smaller projects, it might not be important. If you're a small firm but you work with larger firms and you need to collaborate with them, you might need to consider the regular version. And then out of this presentation and visualization section, you see it has all the same stuff, and there's a lot of features within Revit to do renderings, to do drawings, you can see like sketchy lines and shadows and all this stuff. The one thing is that in the LT version is you do not have end product rendering, which is in the regular version of Revit, you can have a scene and just hit render, just change it to rendering, and it'll render it just directly using your computer in your work session. And what happens is if you buy LT, you need to do cloud rendering, and that's using credits. So, and kind of taking a separate step. Some people like it. I really haven't found a lot of people using the cloud rendering, especially those that have gone to Enscape, which is and then I'm going to talk about that when we talk about add-ins. But if you've heard of Enscape, is an add-in to Revit that does a lot of the renderings, and it does virtual reality, and it does a lot of that kind of stuff. But the regular version has you are fully capable of doing a lot of those things internally. And if you get the LT, you would have to do them in the cloud. And this is going on interoperability. It's basically, you can see it's mostly talking about import, export, and file formats, etc. So all the main ones like DWG, images, these kind of files, it has. So that's not a problem. If you are using Rhino or want to use PDFs or some of these other file formats, you wouldn't be able to. You can see that here. And then this I would say, and now I'm on the last of these feature screens or comparison screens, and this one I think would be the biggest consideration in getting a full version of Revit versus LT. And that's the fact that you can't use any third-party add-ons. You can't, I just mentioned Enscape. You can't buy that add-in, etc., because it doesn't, it uses the API, and allows functions. And I will a shout out to our sponsor of TAP this year, which is Ideate Software, who make an amazing add-in of features. I'm going to actually show a couple of these things when I go to my live session, and it's really useful tools that help in the session. You cannot even use it in Revit LT or any add-on like Enscape or any of those things. And a lot of those features that you get in add-ons are very useful, are very helpful. So this one I think is the main one. There's the collaboration, and this one is the main reasons of going to the regular version of Revit versus LT. But if none of that, if none of that is really that important, or you don't see it as a consideration, Revit LT can definitely do the job and has a much lower price point. All right. So now with that said, if I wanted to just kind of highlight how people are learning lots of things, not just Revit, but learning these days. So this may seem sort of self-explanatory, but I just want to kind of highlight a few. So, one thing is everybody nowadays, which we didn't used to do in the old days, is you can Google just about any anything and anywhere. But what I have found in my office, and a lot of people, including myself, is if you go to Google and you type Revit, et cetera, you're going to get a lot of information. So you can see here, like I typed Revit create title block. So you get sort of a basic, it finds what it thinks is either the most used or most relevant one, puts it at the top, gives you some other ones, highlights some videos, and you can usually find out this task. This is for learning more of tasks. Like I need to do this, create a Revit title block, or I need to do that. Not so much a long learning. I'm sure you can find them on Google, but where I'd say Google searches is definitely advantageous for particular items, particular tasks that you want to try to figure out. Okay. The next resource that I'd show to you, and in fact, if I go back, you can see a lot of times here, if I Google something, a lot of times a Revit knowledge, an Autodesk knowledge article or page will come up in that search, right? So just to show you, Autodesk if you haven't seen it in a long time, they really improved their help and learning aspects. So if you go to Autodesk, and you do learn, Revit, and here's the same thing, create a title block, and it really, has videos, and sometimes they have files, and a lot of that information. So it's definitely something to consider, is looking at the Autodesk learning functions, because they're completely tailor-made to to Revit. I mean, they wrote them and are pretty complete. And then the last resource that I'll point out is LinkedIn Learning. It used to be lynda.com, and LinkedIn bought them and combined them. A lot of Revit courses on LinkedIn. One thing I like about the LinkedIn Learning interface is it has this very nice index where you can go into individual pieces, you can bookmark them, you get an idea of how much time. It has additional information in the video. So I find that very helpful. Another tip that I would give you is this friend and colleague of mine, Paul Aubin, has written a number of online courses for Revit in different areas. But if you look at the title up here, he writes these, they're called like essential training for architecture, and he makes a different one for each version. It is the one that I recommend. I mean, this particular course, if you don't know Revit, or I even use this as a lot of firms use it as introductory training for new employees, because it goes through all the basic concepts. Really gives you a good idea. This is you can see it's a 13-hour course, but because it breaks down in sections, it's very manageable. And this is different. I showed you how in the other ones you might do a particular task or a particular thing. This one takes, Paul takes you on a very logically guided way where you learn the concepts of the program. So I just wanted to throw that in there. All right. So now I'm going to get more, you might call it the theoretical or logical aspects of Revit versus CAD when I'm trying to do it. And I like to, a lot of people, let's say you're used to using CAD or different software, and you know that's drafting or drawing. Perhaps you're building 3D, but a lot of it's drafting. And then you go into programs like Rhino, et cetera, and you are definitely modeling. Now, the thing I think is important about Revit and for people to know, because I think some people get too worried that you're going to have to model everything to get drawings. Now, that isn't true, and I'll show you here, because it's actually, and I call it a hybrid system, because you do model things and then you get the benefit out of those, if you model things, but you also draft things that would be too cumbersome or to model, and you just need to draw it, like details or just things on a plan you don't want to model. And then to round out the elements in Revit, there's datum elements, which are the levels and the grids and the reference planes. Now, if you think about it, drafting elements are definitely 2D, right? They're definitely, and they're in Revit, and you can think about this, they're view oriented. So when you do drafting things like text, dimensions, lines, things like that in a view, they are just in that view, right? You're just drawing on that view. And if you go to another view of, let's say you're on the first floor and you're working on a model view of the first floor plan and you're drafting some stuff, you can go to create another view of that floor, and that drafting stuff will not necessarily be included. It can be, but it's a separate thing. And then when you look at model elements, if I'm putting in walls or I'm putting in windows or that I'm actually using the model elements, those will show up in every view, right? Perspective, plan, section, elevation. And then in those views, I can highlight it by drafting on top of it. And then the last kind of view is like a drafting view. So you can actually pull open in Revit, you can pull open what would be like a piece of paper, right? Tearing off a piece of paper and just going and drafting. You can just draft, typically it's used for details. I use it for charts, use it for all sorts of stuff. So you have both those elements. And then the datum elements are kind of interesting because they are like 3D elements, but they are theoretical. Like the levels, right? Level 1, level 2, level 3 aren't actually, you don't see them, they're not in the building. Same with grids, grid lines. They're theoretical, right? And a lot of things refer to these and relate to these, but they are not built. And so those are typically referred to as datums, okay? So, and a couple things I wanna go over is drafting elements, just very simply, if I might be getting some of my stuff from the model, like the walls or furniture or doors, but when it comes to drafting, I'm doing the dimensioning, I'm writing text notes. I could be, say, drawing a line sketch of how I want this pattern to be. So you can put drafting elements on top of a model-based view. But you can also, like I was saying, just take a blank piece of paper and draw lines and draw a detail, just like you would in any drafting program. So model elements, just to show you like I was saying, the one thing about model elements is they will show up no matter where you look at them: plan, section, elevation, 3D, etc. And drafted elements will not necessarily show up here, okay? Now, just as a caveat, so people are aware, it's interesting because this highlights the hybrid aspect of, this highlights the hybrid aspect of Revit, that if you look at this wall here, maybe I want to draw shutters or something here that I don't want to model, right? Now in elevation, if I look directly in elevation, I could draw this pattern that I want on the wall, right? If I use drafting lines, it's only going to be visible in that elevation. It will never be visible in a 3D view. But I can go into that view, that same elevation view, and let's say draw, not draft, because we're not going to use drafting lines. We're going to use model lines, and I can draw model lines on that surface. Those will show up everywhere. So again, it's this hybrid element. And I always, whenever I've been teaching or, orienting people to Revit over many years, you always want to think about do I want to do this drafting 2D? Do I want to do this modeling 3D? Or is it some combination of the two? And I always act like there's a meter, because sometimes it's not the most efficient thing to model all the time, right? To get every drawing. But it's also not the most efficient thing to draft everything, because you don't get to repurpose stuff. So there's some, the meter goes back and forth, but it's usually between the two is the most efficient way to do drawings. And then this is what I was talking about, datum elements, is you can see the grids and the levels, and then there's also like reference planes and lines that show up that are for the drawings or for the clarification or for the organization, but aren't really actually built. So that's what's called datums. Okay. I'm just going to answer this question since it came up in chat from Pamela about, it says, online learning, do you think it's more helpful to go to an in-person class at first? Now, that's a very good question. And, one is, I don't think you can find in-person classes as much, right, as back before we had all those resources. And two, what I might do, and this is what I would suggest, is do the online things first, because you can do that on your own time, very little money, etc. And when you get to a point, then look for a resource to do more specific training. I can tell you that in like our firm and other firms, again, we'll send people online to some of these courses to get the basics, and then we'll have a class on like specific ways that we use it, standards and procedures and functionality that we use in our office, right? So I would kind of apply that in the same way, Pamela, to what you asked is, I think it's best to kind of get an overview. And again, Paul's class and classes similar to that are very good because you can kind of, you run step by step and go through it. Then engage, you might want to, if you want to engage someone, when you have a bit of knowledge, and then you have specific questions, and that person can show you those. That's where you get the most benefit, I think, with someone alive. All right. So I'm going to, this is the interface overview. Okay. And, I just wanted to bring this up because, again, this is like Revit 101. And if you're coming from CAD or some other program, without, you hear it. I kind of just want to introduce this or show this as in this is how you work, with the software. So I'm going to go over a few things. One is the views, some of the tools, and the organization, because you kind of take these three items, and that gives you a lot of what Revit, the difference that Revit has in it. And, when I get into views, one of the interesting, I don't hear about it as much anymore, but when I started teaching Revit, and one of the things that was very different was this concept of views. Because when we would see views in graphic programs, right, either like, like I said, say Rhino or CAD, it's a very, they're like the view is just specific to that particular graphic element, elements that we're creating or those lines that we're drawing. The thing to think about views in Revit is, this Revit project, if I'm working on this house, for example, or whatever, this Revit project is one big, huge database, okay? So you are entering things in either graphically, you're entering things graphically, or you're entering them numerically, or, in a different way. But all the information is, is extracted into different views. So that's one of the kind of first concepts, is thinking, when I do something in this view, how is it contributing to the database of this building, right? And that's why you have real-time change of, that's why you have real-time change of elements from view to view. And I think it's a good way to continue to think about it, right? Is, if you look at this planting schedule, if I came down and I, change something in the schedule, like if I pick a window and I change it, it's going to change in the elevation and the plan, etc. It's that whole bi-directional, like everything happens everywhere, is the database aspect. Now, drafting views, which I've told you is like a piece of paper that I'm drawing on, less so, right? You're like this, you can see this partition detail was just drawn, just notated and saved in a sheet of paper, and can be reused to, in different cases, etc. But it doesn't really add to the building database. Like we aren't going to count how much insulation we have based on this drafted view. However, it's useful if we don't want to build it to get this drawing, details typically are drawn up, okay? I just want to throw this point out from Kenneth about in-person training. He says that Triton College offers in-person classes. And as I said, I think the value of in-person classes is when you can go to specific items and have someone right there who will address them. Thank you, Kenneth. All right. So the next part of the interface to address is tools, and you're going to do different actions, different functions, etc. And just showing you a way to get about them. So one is the ribbon interface, and I think everyone's familiar with this from different programs, where you click on a tab. Now, one thing you'll notice is, and again, I go back to this 2D, 3D of the hybrid aspect of Revit, is I have a tab annotate. So all these tools are annotation tools, right? So if I were to dimension or add a piece of text or draw a detail line, those are all things that I do in a view. Whereas in architecture, and I'll show you when we pull open Revit, all the modeling stuff, like doing a wall, etc. So if I go to a drafting view, none of those architectural ones will be related, but all of these will show up. So that's in the ribbon. I also talk about contextual. So if you look at the ribbon, and in this case, for example, I select this wall, the ribbon modifies to show you different functions that are related, like these are related particularly to a wall. So that's where you can get a lot of valuable sort of prompting on what might be a what would be next? What could I do to a wall kind of thing? And then the last one I just want to bring up is shortcuts. And of course, all programs have shortcuts. One thing kind of nice about the Revit shortcuts is it does have this dialog box that manages them. So you can search for ones that exist. You can easily add new ones that take effect in your session, etc. So that's a nice function and I think most of you know that the more you learn the program, the more you know what you use a lot and then use shortcuts for that, you do become a more efficient. That's in any program. All right. And then the interface thing I like to talk about organization is, so one of the things of Revit, if you're coming from different programs like CAD or Rhino, is that all the views, all the elements, almost every single thing is kept in this one big file, right? Which continues to grow, as the project evolves. But one thing nice is on this, Revit has a project browser that you can see has a lot of different things, like all the views I could go to. I can go to my legends, schedules, all my sheets are in here. Families, which are the blocks, the things that you use to build, like windows, doors, furniture, and then my groups and my links. So basically in the project browser, I can see everything involved in this project, which is, starts to get large and a lot of items. So that's one organizational aspect that's important to know. There are ways to customize this browser to have it display in different ways and limit things or organize them differently, and I won't go into that, but that's very valuable. Another way that you organize is object styles, and I pulled open this object style box, and this is something that's very interesting because when people come from CAD to Revit, and you're always kind of trying to look at a comparison to layers, right? That's a big organizational tool in CAD. So there are no layers in Revit, but there are two areas that do the same type of organization, and you can kind of mentally think of of that organization in this aspect. So one is object styles. So the way it organizes is by objects, and you can say, so a door, let's say a door opening would have, when it says projection and cut, so when it's in elevation projection, it would be this width. When it's cut, it's this, so that's how it gets what it looks like when it's cut in section, when it actually is sliced through, color, material, all that stuff. So this is how things are organized rather than by layer. But I can tell you that when you export this to a DWG, it exports according to this object styles list. So, doors will go onto a certain layer in CAD, etc. So object styles is actually the closest thing to layers, or is the thing that's related to layers in Revit. Another item that people kind of think of as layers, but I would like them not to, because it's a little more overview, a little larger way of organizing, are work sets. Now, work sets are only available in the regular version of Revit, not in LT. It's one of the aspects that allows you to work on things together with people. And you can see I can put different things in different layers so that I can turn them on and off. Or when I link with other people, consultants layers, maybe I don't want to see, I have a specific work set that, that I want to see of theirs. So these are three organizational aspects. The object styles being closest to layers in CAD, work sets. I like to say it's more like a big file cabinet, and you have these large drawers, and in this drawer is where I'm going to put the stuff that goes in the basement. In this drawer, I'm going to put the stuff that goes in site. So you can kind of break them, you can break it up into pieces. It's not as detailed as object styles or layers. All right, so that ends the PowerPoint part of this presentation. Okay, I did want to, before I go into a live session, just wanted to acknowledge our sponsors. So these are the 1869 Circle Partners. That's of AA Chicago, firms that have done a large amount of support for different programs throughout the year. And specifically, I want to, let me show this here. I want to thank this Ideate software. Ideate is sponsoring TAP for all the programs for technology and architectural practice at AA Chicago for the entire year, which is really great. And one of the reasons I'm really glad to have Ideate as a sponsor is their tools are amazing. They do and I'll show you when we get into things, but they do tools add-ins for Revit, like I said, in the regular version, and they're definitely worth looking into. So, and I'll come back to this at the end. I just want to get rid of the PowerPoint and kind of open the floor to questions and kind of open Revit and have us look at that. But they do have, if you decide to go with a regular version of Revit so that you can have add-ins, they do have a discount on their complete bundle of software, only for people who are watching this right now. So it's going to be a 50% discount off their standalone. You can see they gave it a very nice activation, which is Chicago for Mark. If you want more information, you can take a look at this again. You can call me, but I just wanted to, they don't usually make these offers that often, and they knew I was doing this presentation, and I wanted to share that with you. Okay. So I'm going to get out of this, right? And so at this point, so here's another one from Kenneth. He says, it's worth noting that Autodesk offers free software for students. So that is definitely, something to look into if you're if you're a student, you want to take advantage of any things that you you can. So that's a good point. And then Jane asks, do you assign object styles or they generate themselves from modeling? That's a very good question. I am going to, I'll give you an example of that. And this is where I wanted to, kind of open it up a little more freeform and just show some of these things. So if you look at, I want to show an example. Let's go, I'm just going to come here and take this piece of the, the project, right? And if I go, let's just cut a section. So just to kind of see how that goes, I'll go view, I'm going to cut a section, and I'm going to cut a section. Let me cut one through here. Okay. And so one thing is, you can see that this now has cut, you see like it made a new section. Let's look in the, it's probably this one, right? And if I come and I look, you'll notice, okay, so I'm going to pick this element here. I got to move my, okay, and that's a wall that's being cut through, okay? And this is at metric scale. I mean, it doesn't matter. You can go back and forth. In fact, I can change my units to feet and inches, but you'll notice what it's getting this thickness from, or what it's getting the property of that material from is, and I mentioned this before, is object styles. So if I go down to walls, and you see it says, okay, so it's, and then these are like parts of walls, but in walls, it's going to say, so in projection, that means when it's in elevation, it's going to be this, but I'm going to make this extra thick so that hopefully we can see the difference here. And then I'm also going to say when it's that it's blue, right? So now you'll see, here, let's go object styles again. I don't know if that was thick enough. But if I go down here, let's make this like 9. So, and let's also make this maybe a 200. But so what by default, now I'll show you something. By default, your object styles that I'm showing you, so you said that it gets the information from the default, right? Object styles, but in a view, that's where you can set, if I come down here and I say, okay, I want walls, you can override the default, and so in this view, I want the color to be green, and I want the pattern to be, I don't know, dotted. Let's just try this, right? Oh, here, so here's the walls that I was doing. Look how thick those are. I'm gonna actually go back to object styles. This is a better example. Let's change this back to 5. Right, so it's changing the thickness, but that's in the default. But in the specific view one, I overrode like the color and the style, right? Maybe I say no override, so don't override the style. So the answer to your question is, it gets it from the object styles, but in a view, you can override it for that particular view, and then you can make a view template for doing it. But typically, in this case, you do not pick an object and make that a particular color, etc., because it comes from the object, like it's at a wall, a window, or whatever. Let me see. Now, a good question. Pamela asked, how does Revit handle working on an addition to an existing structure? How much information do you have to add? Now, what's interesting is, and I assume you're saying, let's say you had the existing structure, you had a CAD file that took you up to that existing structure. Because it's a hybrid program, and I'm going to go, here's a more complicated project, but let's say, I could have, let's say this was existing, I could have my CAD file just placed there. If all I was, this is the thing, is it's in plan, right? I can place that CAD file there, and then I can come in, I'm just going to do it here, just say I go architecture wall, and then I could start adding, wall types here. Let's go like this wall. So you can, if you have an existing, here's the CAD plan, and then if you had CAD elevation, etc., you can have a hybrid approach. So if I had the plan in CAD and then I just wanted to start using wall, the elements in Revit, I can have both of them in this information. Now the thing is that then as soon as I go to elevation, right? So if I'm here, let's say that was the original and this was the addition, you would need a CAD elevation, which you could paste here and have elevation. So in that way, it's a very efficient way to do it. Now, depending on if you were going to rework the the relation between the two or something, it might be advantageous to to build up part or some of that that plan, right? And one nice thing I can say is when I have gone over CAD plans in Revit, it does read, like it kind of at least does it in a smart way. It like reads it. If I were to do, let's see if I do a wall here, right? Let's do this. So if this was a CAD file, I think this is Revit, but if it was a CAD file, it will still find, if I'm doing a wall where I'm laying it between lines and kind of find the center line. So it goes fairly quickly and rebuild it, but you don't have to. It can be a hybrid approach, or you can build what you need to. Okay. So Michael asked, when moving into AutoCAD from paper, setting up templates, layers, was a major endeavor. Is there a similar process involved in the starting with Revit that are useful starting points, etc.? So good point. And I was going to mention this, that if you've already moved from paper to AutoCAD and you have your title blocks and you have your, certain things that you use over and over, the best thing to do when you're started Revit is to go through that conversion, right? Take your CAD stuff and make it into Revit elements, the same as you have them, and it should be easier than creating from scratch, right? Because you're just converting it. You convert the CAD files and clean them up in Revit. As far as so that's like with your elements, like your title block and your details, or that kind of thing. When it comes to things that are included in the package, they give you all the pieces that kind of, they give you a blank title block, they give you this, etc. But I don't typically, this is something most people have to do themselves or hire someone to do, because your drawings and your standards and your style are usually very specific, right? So you want to you don't necessarily you need someone who pays. That's what I've done that for companies, or I'm sure you can find people that do it, is because you come in, you find out what needs to be done, and you do it, but you want to get it to look and feel like you're doing it in CAD. In fact, that's one of the things I point out is when I've helped people transition to Revit, is when you get it to be as close to what they had as possible, as in title blocks, as in textiles, as in your targets, as in whatever, it does facilitate it, because everything isn't so shockingly different. You try to make it similar to the style that you want your drawings to be in. But I really think you can take a stab at it, do it yourself or hire someone to help you with that transfer, but of particular important items. But that is a good point, is to try and make it match your style, so it's not just this complete, you don't have to take what Revit has as a target, or a grid bubble, or as whatever, you can adjust it to yourself. And Frank asks, can you create templates in Revit like AutoCAD with properties all set up? Yes. Now here's an interesting thing. I'll just show you how we do ours here at Goettsch. Now again, I think it's the same way if if you're using Revit LT, and one of the things that people do, you can have a template, and I just want to show you here. If I go File, New Project, it either wants a template file, right? Which you can make, you can make a file that kind of has all your line styles and has all your stuff. In fact, I'll show you guys this just so you can see, some of the, you saw object styles, but if I go Manage, let's just go, here's additional settings. Let's just go Line Styles and take a look at this. So, here are, this is for Goettsch Partners. Here's our default line styles, right? With this width and like this. And so you basically get that set up, get your title blocks in, get, all that kind of stuff. And then you can make a template file. And from that template file, you can go New Project. And you can see here, I picked, that's the Imperial template. And let's just say, okay. And what we have here, because we have the full version, is in the template file, it's not work set, and I was going to kind of go over that just to show you quickly, when I talk about the difference. And so I use this for drafting. We use that for drafting. The way most larger firms who use the collaboration, in fact, and I'll go back to this, you can see here are the work sets that I can be adding information to, right? Here's the work set form, which I'll drag over here. Right. And the interesting thing is Revit does not, this doesn't matter whether it's LT or regular, does not let you save a template file with work sets. So because these are important to us, what we do and what a lot of people do is just have a project, right, that you've developed, and then save it, save it as a project but delete all the stuff. And then you're just going to open that sort of blank, instead of using the templates, we just open a blank project. It has everything we want. And that's usually where we start from. Okay. I think that's that's all I needed to cover right now. Oh, I want to show you that this is whether you'd use Revit LT or regular Revit. I did want to show you this, what those add-ins are. So you can see along the top, these are my regular Revit. Here's architecture, right, which I build on, and annotate, is showing you that. But a lot of these different, kind of toolbars and ribbons. And then you'll notice here, these are add-ins, right? So here's one called Guardian. You've probably heard of Enscape, which is a great visualizing tool that hooks to Rhino and Revit and a few other programs. And then here's the Ideate software. This is what I was talking about. So this is the package that they make. But one thing that's nice about, I have to say about Ideate software, is it's really well written and it's very intuitive. And I'll give you an example. Like, they have these things called apps, and so Smart Delete, right? And what this does is that if I'm going to, here I have to select something first, but let's say I was going to delete this wall, right? And then I go and I just want to show you, because this shows you kind of the ease. So it goes, oh, if you deleted that wall, here's some other things that will be deleted. You're going to delete this dimension, you're going to delete this thing. So but that's just an example. And then PyRevit is actually one you can get for free. It's a open source, right? But it has a lot of nice functions. Maybe I'll go into that in a second section. And then we use Unify to organize our families. But so one of the things is this, what I was saying about LT versus a regular, is that on LT, you can't have any of these add-ins. And that's, I mean, I know we use them a lot. Again, it might depend on the kind of work you're doing. I do feel like they're valuable. And there's free add-ins, there's purchased add-ins, and you have to have the regular version to use them. So that is about it, unless anyone has another question. All right, well, let me pull this up again. And I want to thank everybody for joining me today. And I'm going to do 2 plugs here at the very end. So one would be for TAP Chicago. We want it to be open to, and let me see, see if I have the page here. Yeah, here it is. So this is, you guys obviously found it because you came to this webinar. But if you just look at this knowledge community, I just want to say, like, we're going to have, like, once a month, we're going to have different webinars or meetings, and anyone that would like to be involved in sort of developing and creating this TAP community at the AI Chicago, keep an eye here. We're going to have an organizational meeting, I think, next month that you could join. I think we have that hybrid, in person and virtual. You could join this. You could share, learn. When you participate in this stuff, it's that's how I got started. If you start sort of contributing and helping out, you're around people and you're learning. So that's one thing I definitely want to encourage, is your involvement in TAP. And then the questions are, is there going to be a recording? And yes, I think Madison is recording this, and it should be available on the website. Perhaps Madison can send out Vimeo. Okay, so are you going to send out information to the attendees on this, or does it just show up on the website? How does that work?
Yeah, because you signed up for this program, we'll be sending any materials that Mark wants to share with us and this recording to get more involved and to share this wonderful presentation that Mark put together.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. And like I said, this was this is kind of an introductory thing, just to because I think sometimes people forget. We move forward and you hear about like all these new advanced things like artificial intelligence and which are great, but I think we still have to focus on the basics and kind of get everyone familiar or comfortable with it. I think that's a goal of mine, like in the office is while we're looking to do the new advanced things, I mean, still getting everyone on board with BIM seems like a basic objective. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this class. I will leave you with this screen, which is, again, if you have Revit and have you ever heard of Ideate, here's a good chance. Here's a good chance to get a very good deal on their software, because like I said, they don't do it very much. And just be aware of it. And that's one of the things I think is, if you kind of participate and keep an eye on TAP, hopefully we'll have a variety of information to share people, not just, from basics to advanced and whatever the interests are. So by all means, give us some feedback. And I think I will sign off with that.
Thanks so much, Mark.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.